Okay, so what we're looking at is quadratic equations or quadratic functions, and they're basically the same thing. Biggest thing with this one is when we're talking about this, you're going to see x squared in there somewhere. So x squared is the highest power. And when they talk about the highest power, we're kind of previewing something that's going to come a little bit later. That's the degree. So highest power, degree, basically the same thing. And if we're talking about an equation, it's y equals x squared. Where if it's a function, the only thing that's different is instead of doing y equals, it's f of x equals. But it's still, the key thing is you're talking about x squared. And again, the left-hand side, whether it's y equals or f of x equals, that's just the notation of it. The biggest thing is that you have x squared there. Okay, and what we're going to do today is we're looking at just all the details of it, all the things we're going to do, and the biggest thing that we've got to realize today is that when we do x squared, when we graph it, the graph instead, now here's where it's going to be similar. Instead of it being a V-shaped graph like with absolute value, the biggest difference today is it's going to be a U-shaped graph. Now the vertex is still going to be here, so it's still going to be at 0, 0. And your basic shape here is a parabola. Now, just like we did with absolute values, we're going to take this U-shaped graph, we're going to move it up and down and left and right. You know, all the things we did with absolute value, we're going to do the exact same things with it, but now instead of being a V-shaped graph, it's going to be a U-shaped graph. So that's going to be the part where it's going to be similar for everything that's here. Okay, vertex. Because the two main things we've got again to get is the vertex again. The vertex is the top point, or it could be the bottom point. That's on the graph. And we'll talk about which one's which here in just a minute. The vertex is going to also be the point where the graph is split in half. Okay, and that's kind of walking us up to the next thing we're going to talk about when we talk about the vertex. That if you took a line and went back and drew it right down the middle and split this line in half, that the left side of the graph would look exactly like the right side of the half, just a mirror image. That's the symmetry point, or the line of symmetry, and that's the next thing we're going to add in here is talking about the axis of symmetry. And sometimes for that one we'll just do AOS for short, just to kind of speed things up a little bit. Okay, so what the axis of symmetry is, it's a vertical line. Drawn through the vertex. That cuts the graph into equal halves. Okay, now here's where the vertex is. We said in the last part that the vertex was kind of always the most important point. Here's where the vertex gets to be, I'd say more important, but here's where you get some more details off of the vertex than we did in the last part of it. When we talk about the axis of symmetry equation, again, just do AOS for short here, just to speed it up a little bit. It's always going to be x equals the first value of the vertex. So from this equation back up here, if we go back to the basic graph up here, if we did x squared, if we don't move the graph any and all, the vertex is always 0, 0. So from back up here, this equation would have been x equals 0. So they ask you to write the equation of a line for this particular one, the axis of symmetry equation for this one, because the x value of the vertex was 0, it would just be x equals 0. Now again, that'll change on every problem because it's always depending on what the vertex is. But for this particular problem, it would have just been x equals 0. Okay, now here's where we're going to add in something that, again, just add in some other part of here. They're going to talk about either the max or the min value. That's going to be the second value in the vertex. Now, again, that would be 0 for this one, but we'll come back and talk about it more in just a second to kind of go through everything here. So the vertex is the important point, but at the same time, it's going to tell you two things. The first value of the vertex, the h value, that's going to tell you what the axis of symmetry equation is. The second one is the max or min value. And again, we'll show you what all that means here in just a second when we'll show you this one. So, all right, so here's what we're going to do. To graph an equation, we're going to be able to do two things here. First thing is, you've got to plot the vertex. Just like when we were doing absolute values, that we always had to get the vertex first. Well, for these, it's going to be the same thing. You have to find the vertex first, because everything else we do spins off the vertex. Because, you know, the axis of symmetry, the line, the max min value, everything that we do spins off that vertex value. Okay, second thing we're going to do, here's where we're going to kind of, I hate to say we're going to kind of cheat the system a little bit, but we're going to kind of cheat the system, because here's technically what we're supposed to do. You're supposed to plug in the next x value beside the vertex. Into the equation, and then you have to work it out or you have to evaluate it. And what that does is it gives you the next point that's on the graph that you have to do. Here's where we're going to cheat just a little bit. That, yeah, we're supposed to do this, but here's where we're going to cheat a little bit. You remember how when we're doing the absolute values that we had the kind of slope? Now again, it wasn't exactly slope because slope has to be for a line. If we did absolute value, it was kind of like the slope, how it told us how much to move up and over. We're going to do the same thing here, or use the kind of slope, because it's not really slope, but it's kind of like slope. So we're going to use that kind of slope just like we did with absolute value to get to the next point. It's kind of cheating because it's not really part of the rules, but once you kind of know what's going on, it actually works out that way. So that's what we're going to do, and it'll get you through any of the equations that we've got to go through to help you get to those. Okay, first thing with this one is, when we were graphing linear equations, we had all those different forms. We had point slope and slope intercept and standard form and all those things. This one, there's a couple of forms we've got here. And this is one they call the graphing form. And when it looks like this, the graphing gets really straightforward because this is what you want. That's why they call it graphing form. If you have it here, you can graph a line really, or graph a quadratic really easy just with the information you've got here. Tomorrow we're going to look at what we do if it's not like this, how we're going to kind of change it and rearrange it to make it look this way. Okay, just like with absolute values, this A value is kind of like the slope. But here's the biggest thing. If A is positive, the graph is going to open up. Which means something like that. Just like if the A value, if the number in front of the absolute value was positive when the V shape was going up, well now with parabolas it's a U shape. So the A is going to be positive, the graph opens up. Now here's where the max or min comes in. Here's where we're going to add in something. That, again, we didn't talk about this with absolute values, but we almost could have. Alright, your vertex would be at the bottom of the graph. Okay, if it's at the bottom of the graph, is that the maximum point or the minimum point if it's at the bottom? It's the minimum, right? So for this one, if A is positive, and if A is positive, the graph looks like this, the vertex is at the bottom, that means that this is going to be a minimum value. So vertex is at the bottom, so your vertex, is a minimum value. Now again, that's one more detail we're adding in that we didn't talk about on the last test, because with absolute values we just graphed it, we had the vertex. We still knew about the kind of slope part of it that helps us get to the next point. This one we're going to add in one more detail now, is that if you graph this thing and you know the graph has got to point up like this, your vertex is at the bottom, now we're going to call that a minimum value. Alright, and then on the flip side, if your A value is negative, the graph opens. Now, some people might say, why don't you just say points down? Well, technically, mathematically, it's not pointing, it's opening, so they say that it opens down. If you say pointing down, I'm okay with that. Okay. Again, if your vertex is at the top, if you're at the top of the game, you've maxed out your game, so the vertex is at the top, so your vertex is a maximum value. Okay. Now again, it's really similar to when we did the absolute value. The difference is now, instead of it being a V shape, it's a U shape. We're adding in that one more detail now, that we knew that this was the vertex that was here, but we're going to add in that extra part that now we need to figure out, is that a maximum value or a minimum value? And again, it's just based on the way the shape of the graph is going to go. Alright, and just like we did on the last test, the H and the K, that's your vertex. So that part's not going to change. That part's still the same thing. Now, we're still going to do like we did in the absolute values. Inside the absolute values, we change the sign. Now it's inside the parentheses, you're going to change the sign. Now, and don't worry, this morning some people were asking about, well, they said, well, what about the squared value? Does that change things? Really, in this case, all the squared value does is let you know that it's going to be this kind of graph where it's a U-shaped graph. Just like if we'd gone back and put absolute values around these, you know, and had this, where that 2 wasn't here, if you couldn't see that. If you just had absolute values, that lets you know it's a V-shaped graph. So that's really what that's more for, is just to let you know what the basic shape of the graph is. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take examples like this. We're going to practice graphing about 3 or 4 of them, get a good idea of what's going on, and then kind of walk through a homework problem just to make sure y'all. We'll do one homework problem together just to make sure everybody understands what you've got to do online to get through everything. But we'll do that here in just a minute. So. All right, here we go. So the very first thing is we're going to find the vertex. We're going to name the axis of symmetry. Again, just say AOS for short, just to kind of speed up a little bit. Find the max or min value. And then we're going to graph it. Okay, so here we go. Y equals x minus 2 squared plus 3. Okay, now just like we did with absolute values, you take out the 2 numbers that's behind the x. Number on the inside goes first, number on the outside goes second, and again you still change the sign to make it 2, 3. Alright, whatever number is in front of x. Now in this case, there's not a number there, so that means your a value would be 1. Which, again, if you talk about what, and again, it's not really exactly the slope, so we're going to call it the kind of slope. That's 1 over 1. That we still need to go up and down and over to get to the next points here. Now, that kind of slope only works for the first point. After that, you'd have to plug in the values because it's x squared, they're going to change. But again, we're kind of cheating the system a little bit because if we've got the a value, that's going to help us to get to the next point. After that, all bets are off. You have to just plug in numbers and kind of work it out from there. All right, but the big thing is the a value is positive, so that means the graph has to do something like this. So again, whether that's positive or negative, that tells you the shape of the graph. If it's positive, it has to go with the arrows pointed up. If it's negative, the arrows will be pointing down. And again, you know that the vertex is here. That's at the bottom. If it's at the bottom, that means it's a minimum value. Now, here's again where we take all the numbers and make everything work out. The x value, that's your axis of symmetry. So you just tell me what the x value is, that's x equals 2. The other number, that's just your max or min value, so that would be a min value of 3. And again, this is one of those points where finding the vertex is even more important than it was in the last set, because in the last set we found the vertex and we graphed it. Now they're going to ask you to find the vertex. You're going to have to tell me 2 more things. But again, the x value is going to be your axis of symmetry. The y value is going to be the max or the min value, depending on which way the graph is going. Okay, now with that information, that's everything we need. Now we can actually graph this thing and put it all together. Alright, this one needs a lot of room at the top to graph this, so when you graph it, do leave a lot of room at the top of it, because that's where we're going to have to graph everything. Alright, so first 2, 3s are vertex. So go over 2, up 1, 2, 3. There's the first point we need. And since the kind of slope is 1 over... Now again, we know the basic shape has to look like this, so we know the graph is going this way. But whether it's online or on the test, you've got to give me one more point to make sure I know exactly where it is. So, and again, we're going to kind of cheat just a little bit because you're not technically supposed to do this, but it's a little bit of a shortcut. To get to the one next point, we're going to go up 1 over 1. So go up 1 over 1 to the right, and also go up 1 over 1 to the left. There you go, and there's your U-shaped graph. Now, and online, as soon as you start, once you plot the vertex, and once you start to move to the point, it'll automatically draw this graph in for you. You don't have to worry about graphing all the points with it. The axis of symmetry, that's where you're going to go back and then just draw a dashed line right down the middle of it. So that would be x equals 2. So we've got the vertex, we've drawn the axis of symmetry, we've told it was a min value, we've graphed it, we're all good to go there. Now, one other thing that sometimes they'll ask to do this, sometimes not. We're going to go back and talk about domain and range, because again, we talked about that on the last test about domain being the x values and range being the y values. For these particular problems, the domain will always be negative infinity to infinity. Since this is the minimum value, we're going to put that first. So we're going to start at 3 and go up to infinity. So if whatever your highest number is, that's going to be your first number. Ever how low you can go, that's going to be, sorry, I said that backwards. The high number is going to be the second number. The low number is going to be the first number. So tell me the lowest you can go on the graph, and that's as high as you can go on the graph. And sometimes it takes a little bit of practice to get the domain and the range going. But again, we've got some time. We've got 2 sections of this homework we'll work on, kind of let you work on domain and range there. Okay, so that's the basics of what we're doing. What we're going to do is just show you a couple other problems, just work through these, show you some different things, how it's going to look, let you practice with them a little bit. And again, we'll come back in tomorrow or the next time I see you, and we'll keep working on some more graphs and just kind of playing around with them. Alright, so this one. New equation here. Let's go with x plus 4 squared. Okay, again, get the little things out of the way. We know the a value is 1. So your kind of slope would be 1 over 1. Again, technically it's not really slope, but we're going to kind of think about it that way. Okay, your 2 numbers behind the x, one on the inside and one on the outside, that's going to be the part of the vertex. Change the sign from positive 4 to negative 4. And then there's nothing added, so we're going to add 0. Okay, with the a value of 1, again, it's positive, so you know the graph has to look something like this, with the vertex at the bottom. And if the vertex is the bottom, that means it's going to be a minimum value. Okay, and that min value is going to be whatever this second number is, so in that case that was 0. And then your axis of symmetry is going to be x equals -4. So if you can find the vertex, it tells you almost everything you need to get through this particular kind of graph. Because it gives you the axis of symmetry, that's also the top or the bottom of the graph, it's the max or the min value, which talks in about the range. So it's the vertex, that's why we say it's the most important point, because it tells you almost everything you need to know about this graph. Okay, so -4, 0 means we need a lot of room to the left here. Not necessarily so much up and down. All right, -4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's right there. And again, because our slope, or a value is 1, that's kind of like our slope, so we're going to go up 1 and over 1 to get the next point here, up 1 and back 1 to get the next point there, and then just connect the dots to make it a U-shaped graph. Okay, now, and we actually looked at some of the problems earlier in the online homework. It's 50-50 as to which ones have you do more than this. Sometimes they'll let you just do the graph and that's it. Sometimes they want you to go back and then draw a line down through the middle to get the vertex. I mean, to get the through the vertex to get the axis of symmetry. So you just have to read the question just to see if it wants you to do that or not, because it's about 50-50 is whether they want you to do that. Okay, now just for more practice, we'll go ahead and do domain and range here. Domain will always be, every single one of these graphs, it's always going to be negative infinity to infinity. The only part that's going to change is going to be the range, and that's going to change depending on the problem. Okay, and again, when you do the domain and range, when you do the range, you want to tell me the bottom number first. Now, top, again, it goes to infinity, so that's your infinity, so that's there. The bottom of the graph is right here. And again, when you talk about the bottom, that's going to be your max or min value, which in this case was 0. So let's go from 0 to infinity. Again, if it's the minimum value, it goes first in the range. If it was maximum value, it would go second. But all right, 2 more graphs just to make sure we've got everything comfortable. Then we'll take out the Chromebooks and look at a couple of them just to make sure that y'all can get through at least some of the questions in the homework here. Okay, for this one, let's do negative 3x squared minus 2. First thing, you've got your a value, which is negative 3. And again, the a value is kind of like the slope. It tells you how much to move to get to the, I want to get you to the one next point. But the most important thing is that the a being negative 3 tells you the graph has to look something like that. And when you do that, when the vertex is at the top, and if your vertex is at the top, you've maxed out the graph. You've done all you can do. That means it's a max value. Now, and people say, why do you do all this? Because here, that in my mind, when I'm doing one of these problems, that's the first things I'm thinking about. That if I'm doing this graph, before I do anything at all and actually start plotting points, I take the a value, whatever you've got in front of the x squared, and that tells me, number one, what the a value is, but more importantly, that tells me the shape of the graph. If that thing's negative, it's got to go this way, where when it was positive, it had to go this way. So that's the one thing I do, is I get the basic shape of the graph in my head, and that'll work every single time, so at least you've got the right shape of the graph going for what you're going to do. Okay, vertex. We need 2 points. Now, the problem is we only have one number back here, right? Because whatever's behind the x, that's going to be the vertex. And there's only one number back here, so one of them's missing. There's nothing on the inside, so that means that the first value would be 0. That second value is going to be negative 2. So if you do one of these and there's no parentheses when you're graphing these, that first number then of your vertex is going to have to be 0. Because the first two problems we looked at, they had parentheses every time, so that was always the x value. If there's no parentheses, that means the first value is going to be 0. That negative 2 would have to be on the outside of the parentheses since there's not one there. So there's your vertex. And again, what that tells us is that the axis of symmetry is x equals 0, because it's going to be just that first number. The max or min value, that's the second number. It's going to be at negative 2. Okay, and once you've taken the equation and kind of torn it apart to get the numbers, we don't need the equation. Now we've got everything here. So we're going to start at 0, negative 2. So this one I need more room at the bottom. And okay, so 0, negative 2 puts you right here. And again, here's where we use kind of our slope. It's not exactly slope, but we're going. It's close enough to get us through the next point. From here, we're going to go down 1, 2, 3 over 1 to the right, then down 1, 2, 3 over 1 to the left. So once we've gone down 3 over 1 to the right, down 3 over 1 to the left, that's the 2 points we need. And again, once you do the first point, it should automatically start to fill in the graph when you're going through this thing. Okay. And the last thing that you'll do, and again, it's 50-50. Sometimes they ask for domain and range, sometimes they don't. We're going to go ahead and do it. Domain is always negative infinity to infinity every single time. So that one, you can lock that one away. And for the range, again, you need to tell me the low number and the high number. Well, this thing goes down forever, so we're going to start, I generally start at negative infinity, but it's going forever in the negative infinity direction. And since this negative 2 is at the top, that negative 2 is going to be the max value. And the reason we always use the second number is because, again, if we're talking about the range, that's the y values. And that's your biggest or your smallest y value because that's the part of the vertex that you need. All right, one more. For this one, we're going to do x minus 2, or negative 2 times x minus 1 squared and then plus 3. So the a value is negative 2, which again, that's kind of our slope. So that's negative 2 over 1, which again, the biggest thing on this part is that lets you know that if the value is negative, the graph has to go down, something like that. Vertex is at the top, which means if it's at the top, that means it's a maximum. Okay, so, and you can either, if it's a test question, I either have max or min, you can go back and circle it, tell me we're doing max, and, you won't have to scratch out the min part, but basically you just have to go back and pick one or two. So we know it's going to be a max value. Vertex, again, we're going to change this from negative 1 to a positive 1. And it's going to be 1, 3. Axis of symmetry, that's the x value, which in this case is x is 1. And if they ask for the max or min value, then it's just the second part here, that's a 3. Alright, so here's what we put off together. So vertex, we're starting at 1, 3. So we're going over 1, up, 1, 2, 3. So that puts us up here. And this is where we use the a value to get to the next point. So from here, we're going to go down 2 over 1 to the right side and down 2 over 1 to the left to get the U shape. So it's something like that. And again, 50-50. If they want the axis of symmetry, that's where you go back and draw it through the middle. So it looks something like that. And for domain and range, again, domain is always the same thing. For this one, it's always negative infinity to infinity. And again, the range, you need the low point on the graph and the high point on the graph. The low point goes down forever because it never stops. So we're going negative infinity to infinity. It does top out here, so that's the max value of 3. So that's going to go there. And again, the vertex is the most important point because it tells you almost everything about the graph other than the a value, which gives you the basic direction of it. But the vertex tells you all the points that you need. The a value gets to the details to make sure the graph goes in the right direction.